Okay, we're in the book of Daniel tonight. Now remember, we're talking about beyond the exile, and somebody's going to immediately say, well, wait a minute, Daniel wasn't beyond the exile. He was in the exile, and that's true. He lived his entire career, as far as the biblical record's concerned, in exile, either in exile in Babylon or toward the end, of course, in exile in Medo Persia. That is true. But he had some visions, and those visions were means of him knowing the way it was going to be beyond the exile. And that's basically what it's about. So we're going to look at a few different chapters tonight, starting particularly at chapter 7. Now, most everybody's read chapters 1 through 6. It's when you get to 7 that people start not being sure about what's going on. I'm going to be reading from the International English Bible, and I'll tell you what, I was studying for this lesson. I've taught Daniel on the college level more than once, and when I looked at the footnotes in this Bible, I said, man, that is rich. That is good stuff. Because I dug a long time to find out information they've just got in the footnote. This is a very useful tool. It does read a little bit differently, so try to stay with me. We're in Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. In Belshazzar's first year as king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream. Daniel saw visions in his mind as he was lying on his bed. Then Daniel wrote down everything that was related to what he had dreamed. So if we're talking about the first year of Belshazzar's reign, we're roughly at 539 BC. Belshazzar really is a co-regent. His father, Nabopolassar, is actually the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. And Nabopolassar can't live in the capital city, and there's a simple reason for it. Because some facet of his worship was so detestable that the Babylonians wouldn't put up with it. So he couldn't even live in the capital city. So in place of that, his son, Belshazzar, serves as co-regent. So when you get to the story of Daniel in chapter 5, where he's to read the handwriting on the wall, if he reads that handwriting, then they'll make him third in the kingdom. That means he's right behind father and son. That's pretty high up in the kingdom. But of course, Daniel says, "You can keep that. I don't want that." And furthermore, of course, in that chapter, we real quickly find out it's not going to last anyway. And so, what good is it? But nonetheless, Daniel said, "I saw my vision at night. Look, the four winds of heaven were blowing. They made the ocean very rough. And I saw four huge animals come up from the ocean. Each animal was different from the other. The first animal looked like a lion, but it had two wings like an eagle's. I watched this animal until its wings were torn off. It was lifted up from the ground so that it stood up on 2 feet like a man. And it was given the mind of a man." Now, this is the only non-post-exile reference in this chapter, because this is referring to the Babylonian Empire, which often is depicted as a lion. It also has been depicted as an eagle. And in the early days of the Babylonian kingdom, they moved very quickly and conquered many people. But as time went on, they basically had their wings cut off, and they didn't go very fast anymore. And furthermore, it appears that this reference to being given the mind of a man may well be talking about what happens in Daniel chapter 4, when Nebuchadnezzar is humbled before God and ends up getting a different heart or a different mind than what he had before. All right, then he goes on. "Then look, I saw a second animal in front of me. It looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. This is what the bear was told: 'Get up, eat all the flesh you want.'" Okay, the bear. represents the Medo-Persian Empire. And notice it has 3 ribs in its mouth it's chewing on. Well, it conquered 3 nations: Lydia in 546 BC, Babylon 539, and Egypt in 535. And that's probably what's in his mouth. It's the nations that he conquered. Verse 6. After that I looked, and behold, in front of me there was another animal. This animal looked like a leopard, and the leopard had 4 wings on its back. The wings looked like the wings of a bird. And this animal had 4 heads. It was given the authority to rule. All right, a leopard, a fast animal all by itself, but beyond the speed of the leopard itself, he has wings. This represents Greece, a very, very fast-moving army. In fact, before he died at the age of 32, Alexander the Great had conquered the world. That's pretty fast-moving, from my perspective. So a good way to portray that. Then, verse 7, after that, in my vision at night, I continued looking, and behold, there was a 4th animal. This animal seemed cruel and terrible, and very, very strong. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and ate whatever it killed. Then it trampled on whatever was left. This 4th animal was different from all the animals that I'd seen before it. It had 10 horns. So this beast represents the Roman Empire. And Rome had, by this depiction, had 10 kings. If you do a little bit of study in the book of Revelation, you're going to see that there were some more, but they were taken out, replaced, and I think Daniel's taken his visions, the simplified version of what went on, and that's fine. All right, that's looking down in the future, and anybody that knows history knows that's exactly how it happened. Babylon was conquered by Medo-Persia. Medo-Persia was conquered by Greece. Greece was conquered by Rome. That's exactly the order that everything occurred in. And so God, looking into the future, knows exactly what's going to happen. Turn to chapter 8. Different vision. You may have heard this one. It is less familiar. The one in 7 is not as familiar, of course, as the one in 2 or in 4. But in chapter 8, we have another vision that Daniel has. Daniel said, during the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's rule, of course, so you count backwards. If you're going in BC, you go down, not up. So they wouldn't go from 2021 to 2022. They go from 2021 to 2020. See, because BC, that's what we're talking about. And we're working our way towards 0 is what we're doing. So that when he says this, what year is it? Well, it makes it about 536, somewhere in that ballpark is what we're talking about. I, Daniel, had a vision. This was after the first one. In this vision, I saw myself in the castle of Susa. Susa is in the province of Elam. I was standing beside the Ulai River. This was the vision I saw. I looked up, and behold, I saw a male sheep standing beside the river. It had 2 long horns, but one horn was longer than the other. The long horn was more recent than the other horn. I watched the ram charge toward the west. He charged to the north and to the south. No animal could stand against him, and none could save another animal from his power. He did whatever he wanted and became very powerful. Our Medo-Persian Empire, which came first, Medes or the Persians? The answer is the Medes. But by the time that this vision is seen, the Persians have risen to a greater power. And so the taller horn is the more recent horn, but it's also more powerful. It's bigger, if you would. And notice he goes in every direction. He comes from the east, so you don't worry about the east. It's not going to be listed here. That's where he comes from. But what does he do? And as you look at that, he goes to the west, that's Babylon. He goes to the north, that's Mesopotamia, or the land between the rivers. And then he goes to the south, which is Syria and Asia Minor. And so what did the Medo-Persian Empire do? Exactly that. Conquered the world. They conquered everything except themselves, of course. And they'd already taken care of the East because they were the East at that particular point in time. But then he goes to another sight that he sees. Well, I was thinking about this. Behold, a male goat came from the west. This goat had one large horn that was easy to see. It was between his eyes. He crossed over the surface of the entire earth, but his feet did not touch the ground. That goat charged at the ram, which had the two horns. This was the ram that I'd seen standing by the river. The goat was very angry. I watched the goat attack the ram. It broke both of the ram's two horns. The ram could not stop it. The goat knocked the ram to the ground. Then the goat trampled all over him. Nothing was able to save the ram from the goat's power. Okay, who is the goat? Well, notice fast moving. Okay, I already told you something about the fast mover. Yes, I know Medo-Persia initially was that way, but nobody equaled Alexander the Great. I mean, nobody, not even the Romans later, would move that fast. He moved in a hurry in the work that he did, so he represents Alexander the Great. Notice in this Bible that I'm using, the footnote says Alexander's army crossed the Hellespont and fought their way all the way to India non-stop. They go from Greece to India, and you can't stop them. Nobody could stop them. When Alexander was alive, the Greek army was not defeatable. Nobody could beat them. So that's what he's talking about. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about it, but in just a minute, because the rest of the chapter is what assures me I got that right. It's going to tell us who these various animals are. But let's go ahead with verse 8 here. So the billy goat became very powerful, but when he became strong, his big horn broke off. And that's exactly right. When Greece conquered the world under Alexander the Great, it was right then that Alexander died. Now, we don't exactly know what happened to him. Some people say he may have been assassinated. That does not seem to fit. And I'll tell you why it doesn't, because he had an extended illness. Sounds like he got something and they couldn't get rid of it and he died. But he died at a very young age, only 32, when he died. And so what happens after he dies? Well, read on. And then a little horn grew from one of the, I jumped ahead. Go back to verse 8. Big horn broke off. Then 4 horns grew up in the place of the one big horn. Those 4 horns were prominent. They pointed in 4 different directions. Now study, and what you're going to discover is when Alexander the Great died, the kingdom was divided. And guess what? It was not divided among his family. Normally you'd expect a king's going to give it to his son. But that didn't happen. Instead, these were men that were close to Alexander the Great. And we know who they are, historically speaking. We've got Cassander, who was in Macedonia, most of Greece, and part of Thrace. Then we have Lysimachus, and he conquered or had Lydia, Ionia, Phrygia, and part of Asia Minor. And then we have Seleucus, and he had Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Central Asia. And of course, I'm using our terminology when I do that. And then we have Ptolemy, who had Egypt and the neighboring regions. So these are the various ones. But it doesn't stop there, does it? Then a little horn grew from one of those 4 horns. It became very big. It grew toward the south, toward the east, and toward the bountiful land of Judah. That little horn grew big until it reached up to the skies. It even threw down some of the army of heaven and the stars to the ground, and it trampled on them. That little horn magnified itself against the commander of the army of heaven. It halted the daily sacrifices. The place of his sanctuary was pulled down, and the army of God was given over to it. Because of this, the people sinned by stopping the daily sacrifices. It was like throwing truth down to the ground. The little horn was successful in everything it did. Well, who does this look like? I think it's likely Antiochus Epiphanes. And Epiphanes is the name he gave himself. You know what it means? Illustrious one. Can't you just see this guy? And he's all swole up, and he's got his fingers in his suspenders, and he's important. You know, that's the way he views himself. Now, in the footnote again of this International English Bible, here's what it says: he slaughtered about 40,000 Jews in Jerusalem. He entered the most holy place and offered a pig on the altar as a sacrifice in order to desecrate the temple. You remember, a pig's unclean to a Jew. He sprinkled the broth of the pig over every part of the sanctuary for the specific purpose of polluting it. He plundered the temple of the altar of incense, the table of showbread, and the golden lampstand. So he stole every valuable article from inside the temple. Every one of them. He took them. And by the way, you might say, wait a minute, Nebuchadnezzar took them. Yeah, but Cyrus gave them back. Yeah. Cyrus said, you take all this back with you. He actually meted out all the gold and so forth that was in the treasury of the temple of his God. And he gave it back to the Jews. But Antiochus Epiphanes took all of that. He stopped at all the Jewish worship and forced the Jews to worship Jupiter's statue, also known as Zeus Olympus. I'll tell you a little bit more about him. He made them stop circumcision. He made them develop a gymnasium. He's going to Hellenize them. And if he's going to Hellenize them, what are they going to do? Well, they exercise with no clothes on. And you think about God's rule, for example, about the priest. You remember how meticulous he was to make sure that the priests had on, their garments went down to about their knees, and they actually had under their garments, they had linen, we call them shorts, but they go down to practically the knee. Why? So that when they go up, you can't see there's no embarrassment at all. But here along comes Antiochus Epiphanes, and he's trying to lead the Jews away from God and into service to false gods. And this is all being portrayed by Daniel. Years before Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus Epiphanes is way down about 200. We got Daniel writing this in about 530, 536? We're talking about 330 some odd years ahead of time. He's telling you exactly what he's going to do. And that's the way God's book works. All right, now, we could talk about more of that. In fact, just in case you want to pick up, look at verse 20. You saw a ram that had two horns. Those horns are the kings of Media and Persia. The fierce billy goat is the king of Greece. And the big horn between its eyes is the first king. That'd be Alexander. After that horn broke off, 4 horns grew up in its place. We showed you who those were, didn't we? That took over, the Grecian Empire. Those 4 kings will come from the nation of the first king. However, they will not be as strong as the first king. When the end comes near for those kingdoms, a particular bold and cruel king will come. This king will tell clever lies. Well, he's not talking about the end of time. He's talking about the end of that kingdom. And Antiochus Epiphanes is effectively the last king that has any real authority among that group of 4 that took over Alexander's kingdom. Ultimately, we're going to talk about him in chapter 11. We're going to see him collapse, him be defeated, just as God said that he would through the prophet Daniel. All right, the rest I want to look at is chapter 11. Now, it's not that 9 and 10 aren't good. They're very good, very interesting. They primarily deal with chapter 9, the prayer of Daniel, how he asked God to forgive them because they were sinful. And why did he do that? Because he'd been reading, guess what book he read? Jeremiah. And what did Jeremiah say? 70 years. That's how long the captivity is going to be. And Daniel did some quick calculations. Guess what he came up with? We're about there. It's about to happen. So he prays to God. And he basically says, we're not worthy. We're not worthy of being delivered. We're wicked people. We've not done what you'd want us to do. And that's a lot of what 9's about. 10 goes on a little bit forward with that. But 11 continues with this discussion of what's coming after the exile. We want to begin at verse 1 of Daniel chapter 11 and see what he had to say at that time. Then the man in the vision said to me, in the first year, Darius the Mede was acting king. I stood up to support Michael. I supported him in his fight. Now, in chapter 10, there's a great discussion about Michael and how he was in a battle fighting for God against the forces of evil. And Daniel stands up for him. Now, he could only do that on the earth. And not all of Michael's battle was on the earth, but nonetheless, Daniel stands with him. So here he comes. Now then, Daniel, listen, I tell you the truth. 3 more kings will rule in Persia. Then a 4th king will come. He'll be much richer than all the kings of Persia before him. He will use his riches to get power, and he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Okay, who are the kings? Well, I wrote them down here for you. We know Cyrus was the first one. Who comes after him? Cambyses the second, Smerdis. I'm just calling him Darius the first. I can't even say his second name. I'll be honest with you. I've tried to teach that before, and I still couldn't say his name, so I'm being honest. And then Ahasuerus or Xerxes. You look at him historically in history, he's Xerxes. That's how you're going to see him listed. In the Bible, in the book of Esther, he's called Ahasuerus. He's got a different name, but nonetheless a name that truly was one of his names. Well, he was richer than any other king in that empire. And that's exactly what Daniel is told. He was richer. But he was really, really going after the kingdom of Greece. Now go back and think about that billy goat. Why might the billy goat have been mad? Because this king, Xerxes, kept pounding away on Greece. And when Alexander came along, he had his fill of it. He is going to let him have it. And that's exactly what's depicted by the prophet. That's exactly the way he describes it. Okay, so he goes a little bit further with this. The 4th king will come, I said that, and he's going to be going against Greece. Verse 3, then a mighty Greek king, Alexander, will come. He will rule with great power. He will do anything he wants. After that king has come, his kingdom will be broken up. It will be divided up toward the 4 winds of the skies. His kingdom will not go to his descendants, and it will not have the power that he had. This is because his kingdom will be pulled up and given to others. Now, we've already mentioned this. It's really out of normal character for any nation of that time for the kingdom to move from one family to another. Usually the kings come from the same family. So thus, when you start talking about the Egyptian rule of the Ptolemies, you got Ptolemy the first and the second and the third and the fourth. It just keeps going down the line as you make your way along. So, in fact, and I am so indebted to Hannah Broom. She asked me a question today, and I'd taught this before, and I'd always made an assumption. We're going to talk about a Cleopatra in a little bit, but it's not the one you're thinking about. If she hadn't asked the question, I wouldn't have delved into it more deeply. But the Cleopatra that you are thinking about actually married 2 of the Ptolemies. She married Ptolemy the 13th And he got killed, and she married Ptolemy the 14th, because that was the rule. If the brother dies, you got to marry his brother. That was the rule in their land at that time. Well, Cleopatra had an illegitimate child that she wanted to be king, and so she killed the brother. So she killed, one died, and she killed the other one at 13 and 14. She's married to both of them. Just a little side note. If you like history, all this is fascinating. If you don't, let me make you one promise. This only lasts 1 week. Okay, so just hang on and we'll be through with it. But I'm fascinated by the way the Bible nails it on the history. And again, you're talking about 200-300 years ahead of time, and the Bible's getting it meticulously. Every detail is correct, and that's remarkable to me. And that's what's going on here. Verse 5, chapter 11. The king of the south will become strong. Okay, who's king of the south? Well, remember, we said that Ptolemies took over Egypt. Where's Egypt? Isn't it south of Israel? Yeah, that's exactly where it is. So king of the south would be the Ptolemy. That's who that would be. But one of Alexander's commanders will become even stronger. Who's that? That's Seleucid. The Seleucids. And guess where they are? They're in the north. See, that is going to be a continual battle. Now, I want you to imagine for just a moment. Some of you have seen a map. Usually when I draw this map, I can't draw worth a hoot, but I can almost draw this map because, you got the Mediterranean Sea makes this arc, like the moon when it's, quarter? Isn't that what they call that? And it's got that rocker, shape to it. Okay, that's the way the Mediterranean is. Egypt would be down here at the end of the rocker, and Israel would be about midway, and then up at the top would be, you'd be getting into the north where the Seleucids would be. Okay, if you've got Egypt down here at the bottom of the rocker, and you've got the Seleucids and their empire at the top of the rocker, guess who's right in the middle? Israel. And every time that one goes to attack the other, they just, stop and, practice fighting by knocking the hooey out of the Israelites. That's the way they work. And it goes that way all the time in this Old Testament history. So, it's still happening today. Yeah, there is some element of that. That's true. Okay, so we got this stronger one. He'll begin his rule to rule his own kingdom with great power. Then, after a few years, the king of the south and the commander will become friends. The daughter of the king of the south will go to make a peace treaty with the king of the north by marriage. However, she will not keep her power, and he and his family will not last. She, her royal escort, her father, and her supporters will be killed. Guess who this is? This is the Cleopatra, but not the one that you usually think about. This is more than 100 years before that Cleopatra. This is Cleopatra the first. I didn't know any women had first, second, thirds, but these Cleopatras do. She's Cleopatra the first. And what happened was her daddy, who was a Seleucid, that means he's northern, right? Her daddy says, you know what? I got an idea. I know how I can spy on the Ptolemies. I'm going to marry my daughter off to him, and she can be my spy. Problem is that Cleopatra was an honorable woman. She married a Ptolemy, and when she married him, instead of spying for her daddy, she aligned with the Ptolemy against her daddy. And that's a remarkable truth, that took place there. All right, keep going. Verse 7. But a person from her family will become king of the south. He will attack the army of the king of the north. He will go into that king's strong walled city. He'll fight and win. He'll take their gods and their metal idols. He will also take their valuable things made of silver and gold. He will take those things back to Egypt. Then he will not bother the king of the north for a few years. Next, the king of the north will attack the king of the south. Nevertheless, He'll be beaten back to his own country. All right, we're working right on down through this section here. And what we discover is Seleucus gained primacy in Syria. After some years, these two regimes would unite as a result of the marriage of the daughter of Ptolemy, this time it's Bernice, to the northern ruler, Antiochus II, grandson of Seleucus, who would be king of Syria. Eventually, Ptolemy died, and Bernice was murdered. Subsequently, Antiochus was also murdered. Eventually, however, a branch out of Bernice's roots, Ptolemy III, her brother, raised an army and overthrew Syria. So that means Egypt. Remember, Ptolemy's Egypt, Seleucids are Syria. They overthrew the Syrians, even though the Syrians previously had been the most powerful. What did they do when they did that? They took everything, all their valuables, took them down to Egypt. Just exactly what Daniel heard in the vision. That's exactly what happened. Well, let's begin at verse 9 again. Look at verse 9 and what happened. Seleucus II attacked the king of the south in 240 BC. Now, remember, Daniel's writing in what? About 536, somewhere along about that. 240, wouldn't that be more than 100 years beforehand? But what happens? He attacked, he regained much territory, but ultimately he was defeated by Ptolemy III. And you're going to see that in just a minute. So pick up now at verse 10. The sons of the king of the north will prepare for war. They'll get a large army together. That army will move through the land very quickly like a powerful flood. Later, that army will come back and fight. They will fight all the way to the strong walled city of the king of the south. Then the king of the south will become very angry. He'll march out to fight against the king of the north. The king of the north will have a large army. However, he will lose the battle. The soldiers will be carried away, so the king of the south will be very proud. And he will kill tens of thousands of soldiers from the northern army, but he will not continue to be successful. Okay, let me give you some thoughts about that. After Antiochus III, also called the Great, penetrated Galilee and Samaria in 218 BC, Ptolemy IV, called Philopator, defeated him at Raphia in 217 BC and retained control for another 14 years till 204 BC. However, two things prevented him from maintaining his power. Number one, he was too proud, and you can see that in the text. Number two, he didn't press the battle hard enough. There's some biblical records of other kings that didn't press the battle hard enough. And because of that, they lost their power after time. This is another one, follows that same suit. And Daniel anticipates all of that, and that's why the victory will not last. So let me continue there with verse 13 and following. Then the king of the north will gather another army and come back. That army will be larger than the first army. After several years, he'll attack. That army will be very large, and it will have plenty of weapons. In those times, many people oppose the king of the south. Some of your own people who love to fight will turn against the king of the south. They will think it is time for God's promises to come true, and they will fail. Then the king of the north will come. He will build up siege ramps all around the city walls, and he will capture a strong walled city. The defenses of the south will not have the power to fight back. Even their best soldiers will not be strong enough to stop the army of the north. The king of the north who opposes him will do whatever he wants. No one will be able to stand against him and gain power over the bountiful land of Israel. By the way, we sing a song, Beulah land, sweet Beulah land. That's this word. Translated here, bountiful. And that's really what it means, by the way. But and he will have power to destroy it. So Ptolemy IV died mysteriously. Some people say he was murdered. That may be true. I don't know. I just say mysteriously because I can't prove it one way or the other. and his 6-year-old son took over. His name was Ptolemy the Fifth, Epiphanes. Antiochus III initiated the Fifth Syrian War and won at Panion. Now, we don't know the name Panion, or I don't, but I'll tell you the New Testament name, and you'll know it, Caesarea Philippi. So he won the battle at Caesarea Philippi in 200 BC. So we're moving right on down, aren't we? And is God speaking to his people at all at this time? No. God quit speaking after Malachi. He totally stopped. And so here they are, fighting all these battles and stuff, and they don't really have a word from the Lord except that they go back and read what was already written. That's all they know. So this Antiochus III, that's the father of Antiochus Epiphanes, tried aggressively to Hellenize the Jews. I've already told you Antiochus Epiphanes did it. He did it in many, many ways. But he did it through subterfuge, and we'll talk more about that later. All right, look at, here comes 11:17 to 19. Here comes that story I told you earlier when a shorter version was found. The king of the north will decide to use all of his power to fight against the king of the south. He'll make a peace treaty with the king of the south. The king of the north will give one of his daughters as a wife to the king of the south. He will do that so that he can defeat the king of the south. However, those plans will not succeed or help him. Why not? Because his daughter didn't stay with him. She said, I'm married to him, I'm going to go with him. That's what she said. Then the king of the north will turn his attention to other places. He'll capture many cities on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, but a Roman commander will put an end to the pride of the king of the north. The commander will turn that pride back on him. After that happens, the king of the north will go back to the strong-walled cities of his own country, but he will lose his power, and that will be the end of him. Now remember, this is Antiochus III that we're talking about right now, not Antiochus Epiphanes. So what has he just said? Well, he gave Cleopatra, remember? I already told you that's not the same one you're thinking about. That one lives over 100 years later. Push her out of your mind for right now. This is not the movie you all have seen at all. Okay, so here we go. He turned toward Greece, which when she allied with her husband, instead of him attacking Egypt, he turned toward Greece in an effort to keep Rome out of Asia Minor. This is about 192 BC. You can imagine at that point it's not going to be successful. Rome is already getting very powerful at that point in time. But he lost 10,000 troops at Thermopylae. Scipio, a Roman general, outmaneuvered his poorly trained troops at Magnesia, 50 miles north of Ephesus. Most of us heard of that. That's in Asia Minor in 190 BC. So the Romans beat him. In fact, they humiliated him. Now, you got to look out for humiliated people. They're not much fun to deal with. And that's going to be worse with his son than it was with dad. Okay, let's look at verse 20 then. The next king of the north will send out a tax collector to maintain the royal splendor. In a few years, that ruler will be killed. However, he will not die in anger or in battle. All right, next ruler that we're talking about here is Seleucus the Fourth. He reigned peacefully except for one attempt to raise taxes in Israel. Let me tell you, if there are any people on the face of the earth in those years, even in Jesus' years, that you don't want to raise taxes on if you don't want to fight, it's the Jews. They like to fight, and especially if you try to raise their taxes. They're really going to fight then, and he found that out. Well, he was assassinated before Onias III, the high priest, could appeal his action. So in other words, in Judah, there was a high priest. Now, he's a legitimate high priest. He's from the family of Levi. He was going to go to Seleucus IV, and he was going to ask, please please, just let us, let us not have this tax increase, and we can solve this thing. We don't have to have war over this. We can solve it. But he was assassinated. I'm not talking about the high priest, although he was killed later. But I'm talking about the king. He's killed, assassinated. And so the high priest didn't get to talk to him. Well, what happens next? Look at verse 21 and following, and we'll see it. That ruler will be followed by a man who is hated. He will not have the honor of being from a king's family. He'll attack the kingdom when the people feel safe. He'll take power by lying to the people. He'll sweep away large and powerful armies in defeat. He'll even defeat a prince who made a treaty. Many nations will make alliances with that hated ruler, but he will lie to them. He will gain much power, but only a few people will support him. The richest area will feel safe, but that hated ruler will attack them, and he will succeed where his forefathers did not. He will take things from the countries that he defeated, and he will give those things to his followers. He will plan to defeat and destroy strong cities. He'll be successful, but only for a short time. Who are we talking about? Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, we already know he gave himself that name. He's very proud of himself. You want to know how proud he is of himself? In the times of Paul, there are at least 11 cities that are named Antioch. They're all named for him. I mean, just everywhere he went, he put his name on the city. And so it was Antioch of this place and Antioch of that place. See? The one where Paul sets out from is Antioch on the Orontes. That's a river. The Antioch that he goes to in Acts chapter 13 from Antioch on the Orontes is Antioch in Pisidia. That's just two of them right there in the New Testament. This guy's proud and nobody likes him. Now, they'll try to make a treaty with him for sure, but he'll lie to you. He just makes a treaty to get you to leave him alone long enough till he can beat you and take your stuff. That's the way that he operates. So he's a very, very dangerous type of fella. So the illustrious one, Onias the third, he was the legitimate high priest, was murdered in 171 BC, and Jason, who is not of Levi, paid the most money to take his place. And you know what? From that time forward, you get in the New Testament and look at all the high priests you have. You got Annas and Caiaphas, don't you? Well, that's father-in-law and son-in-law. Both high, and neither one of them is of tribe of Levi, as far as we know. See, they're sitting in that. They're sitting in that place. How'd they get there? Money. Pay enough money, you get the job. That's kind of what they do. So that's how they turn things. And the turn started under Antiochus Epiphanes. He wanted the money. He'd sell you the position if you had enough money to buy it. Okay. Well, I'm not going to have time to read the rest, but what he's got. The first Egyptian war is recorded there. He crowned himself king of Egypt as you go on down through. Ptolemy asked Rome for help. And boy, you talk about being humiliated. Antiochus Epiphanes was humiliated by the Romans. They came to Alexandria in Egypt, and he got so afraid of them, he ran. But where'd he run to? Ran straight to Israel and beat the fire out of them. That's what he did. And it's all recorded here. Daniel knew it was coming. He committed a number of vile acts. We looked at some of those earlier, the slaughtering of a pig in the temple and things like that. And then finally he died, but just like Daniel said, he didn't die in war. He didn't die because somebody killed him. He got a terrible illness, and all the historians say he lived in agony until he died an awful death. And so, did Daniel get it right? Yeah. Now, if you want to read a little more about it, I don't believe they're inspired, but you might want to read especially 1st Maccabees, 2nd Maccabees. Both of those. 1st Maccabees is particularly good history, if you're interested in a history book. Another one that talks about it, of course, is Josephus. He writes about it as well. So next week, we're going to begin to look at the between the Testaments period, talk about some of the things that happened there.